The labour market is a resource market. Okay, we use the market model: demand and supply, demand for labour, supply of labour. The price of labour is the wage rate. Okay, the shape of the curves, we have a downward sloping demand curve representing the fact that at lower levels of wages, employers can afford to hire more workers down here. The supply curve of labour is upward sloping because at higher wage rates, more people are prepared to work. Now, you'll notice that the supply curve becomes vertical. This is at the full employment rate. Regardless of how high the wage rate is, we just cannot attract any more workers because all those who want work are fully employed. Shifts of the curve. Firstly, shifts of the supply curve. If we had an increase in the retirement age, so older people can work longer, or we had a reduction in the school leaving age, or in fact we had an increase in immigration of working age people, the supply curve, an increase in the supply of labour would shift the supply curve to the right, and you'll notice that the wage rate would in fact decrease to W1. Shifts in the demand curve for labour are very significant. If you consider that whenever there's an increase in the demand for goods and services, we will need more inputs, more resources, and that goes for labour. An increase in the demand for education would mean there's an increase in the demand for teachers. Okay, so the demand curve would shift to the right, and that would increase the wage rate. Notice that the vertical axis on this graph is shown as real wages. Real wages, as you see in the formula above, real wages are nominal wages, that's in current prices, divided by the price level. Okay, so this gives us an indication of the purchasing power of wages, workers' wages. So an increase in real wages is going to buy workers more goods and services. Note that if we know the percentage change in the nominal wages and we know the percentage change in the price level, we can take one from the other and we can actually work out the change in real wages. If you have a look at this table here, let's say a 10% increase in nominal wages accompanied with a 10% increase in the price level means that in fact the real wages haven't changed at all. Workers are no better off. However, if there was a 2% increase in nominal wages and the price level only went up by 1.8, workers are a little bit better off. This means that their wages would buy them more goods and services. In many countries, the government intervenes in the labour market. For instance, they might impose a minimum wage rate. Minimum wage rate. Okay, they would do this because workers should be able to afford a reasonable standard of living for their families. As you would have learnt in the previous chapter, the minimum wage or minimum price would actually only have an impact on the market if it is set above equilibrium. So if you look at the graph at a wage rate of $11 here, okay, we're in equilibrium and we are employing 2.15 million workers. Now, if the minimum wage rate is set above equilibrium, okay, the market is unable to achieve equilibrium. So what will happen is that the quantity supplied of labour will be greater than the quantity demanded. If you ever look at the case where the minimum wage rate is $12 per hour, okay, here, and if you look at it, the quantity supplied of labour is 2.2 million, whereas the quantity demanded is 2.1, okay, which gives us a surplus of labour, this quantity here, all right? We actually call this involuntary unemployment. There are people there who want work but cannot find it. In fact, 2.2 million workers are there, but the market will only employ 2.1. Okay, so those people are going to be unemployed, and we call this involuntary unemployment. The quantity of workers who choose not to work, that's those between 2.2 and 2.3, they are voluntarily unemployed. We call this voluntary unemployment. Now, if you look at the situation where the minimum wage rate has been increased by the government from $12 to $13, we can see that the surplus of labour, the involuntary unemployment, has doubled. Right? It's doubled from 0.1 of a million to 2.2, right? All the way between 2.05 and 2.25. All that amount there would be, remember, it's called involuntary unemployment. So as the minimum wage rate increases, the area of involuntary unemployment actually goes up, whereas the amount of voluntary unemployment actually falls. So to summarize, an increase in the minimum wage rate is going to lead to an increase in the involuntary unemployment, whereas it will lead to a decrease in the voluntary unemployment. The image for this next slide actually comes from activity A9.4. Okay, if you look at question 1, the equilibrium wage rate is going to be J, and the equilibrium level of employment is going to be H. Right, so equilibrium, don't forget, where they intersect between the supply and demand. The wage rate is J, and the level of employment is H. Now, looking at the second question, if the government imposes a minimum wage rate at A up here, okay, the change in the level of employment actually falls from H to I. The level of involuntary unemployment goes from nothing at equilibrium to IG. Okay, that's quantity there. And the level of voluntary unemployment, which used to be all this area HF, has now decreased to GF. Now, in summary, the key things that you need to have learnt from this video is the fact that the labour market is a resource market. An increase in the demand for final goods or services will increase the demand for labour. That's the derived demand. It's a very important concept. The government intervenes in the interest of equity, to ensure that workers and their families can afford a reasonable standard of living, and they do this through the minimum wage rate. However, as we know from our previous analysis, that a minimum price control, in this case a minimum wage rate, will only be effective in the market if it's set above equilibrium, and of course then that leads to a surplus, which we call, in the case of the labour market, involuntary unemployment. Okay, don't forget to do lots of reading, and we'll see you soon.